I've got a piece up on Salon.com. It's over at rawstory.com. It's over at alternate.org. I think it's on commondreams.org right now. Basically pointing out that Donald Trump is inviting authoritarian governments to hack our elections, joking about it with President Putin, stuff with Saudi Arabia, et cetera, just laying this out. And of course, he wouldn't do that. And I think this might be one of the reasons why he doesn't reach out to democratic governments, small d democratic governments, why he's not, why he's dissing the Europeans, because they're not going to help him by hacking an election. But, and this is why I think Mitch McConnell is blocking any legislation that would harden our election systems, which our own government is suggesting there's over 10,000 voting machines that are vulnerable to hacking. And not all of them are necessarily even connected to the internet, but once the data from them goes into the tabulators, the parts of the voting system, they're very vulnerable to hacking and may well have been hacked in the past. So, Trump is doing this, and it raises, I think, a larger question, and that's the one that I want to pose for the hour, which is America the first developed country to begin moving backwards? When we look at the history of the United States, the story we tell ourselves is that, we were one of the first modern democratic republics. But the fact of the matter is that if we want to call ourselves democratic, in the small d, democratic, meaning, the will of the majority, that was certainly not the case at the founding of this republic. And if we wanted to call ourselves a republic, a form of government that is led by the rule of law in which the people have a say in how things happen, we really weren't even a democratic republic at the founding of our republic. People of color could not vote or participate in the political process. Women could not vote or engage in the political process. Neither people of color nor women were allowed to own property, were allowed to sue, were allowed to participate in commerce. This was the case, by the way, for both of these groups all the way through the 18th century, from 1787 until 1800, the entire 19th century from 1800 to 1900, and frankly, the first 50 years or so of the 20th century. I mean, women got arguably, black men got the vote in the late 1860s. I think it was 1868, the 13th Amendment and the 13th, 14th, 15th were ratified over, as I recall, a period of a couple of years, but during Reconstruction, but it really didn't stick, as it were. I mean, we all know about the failure of Reconstruction. Women didn't get the vote until 1920, with the 19th Amendment. And so we've really only been a democratic republic for, let's say, since 1920. And even at that, we still had separate but equal until 1954. And we still had redlining, institutionally, to the, not in the way that you can point to and say, aha, that company just drew that map, but functionally, structurally, as a result of the way the economy has been put together, to this day. So if you define us, but to get back to my original point, within this larger arc, we started out with only white men voting and having power in the United States. And in many states, it was only white men who owned property. Then we went to, white men more generally, including poor white men. Then we included people of color, and then we included women. And you could say at each step along the way, the United States became more democratic, small d democratic, which is, a good thing. I don't think anybody would disagree with that that's a good thing. And we made some really substantial gains in the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, and the 1970s with the empowerment of the middle class, the empowerment of women, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, which has become the LGBT movement, right across the board, LGBTQ movement. We step by step, we have been moving forward, and we've been moving forward really rather rapidly over the last, over that period from 1940, basically, or let's say 33, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, until 1980, when Reagan became president, or 81 when he was sworn in. And then we started going backwards. We had a third of America was unionized when Reagan came into office. Now it's 6% in the private economy. We're actually going backwards in terms of the rights of working people. We had media in this country when Reagan came into office that was, you know, broadly, I'm lacking the word. I mean, you know, certainly our corporate media had a lot of problems, and it was very, you know, it was run in a kind of top-down way, but it was at least relatively broadly honest. Now we have, openly dishonest media in the form of, Fox so-called news and right-wing hate radio, which literally can be heard in every city, town, and even unincorporated rural area in the United States. The people behind this anti-democracy movement have spent a fortune building out, and they call it conservative. I would call it fascistic, or at least corporatistic, media structure here. For example, Tucker Carlson last night. I'm not sure if this was last night or the night before. I believe it was last night. It was Tuesday night. Tucker Carlson did this segment about Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar, now first of all, you got to get the story of this woman. She was born in Somalia, where there was a civil war going on. She and her family fled Somalia in 1991, and they spent 4 years living in a refugee camp in Kenya. They left Kenya and arrived in the United States under a resettlement program. That would have been in '94. This was during the Clinton administration. And she became a citizen. And then she ran for Congress. This Somali refugee ran for Congress because she so loves this country. She so wants to participate in this country. And in fact, she responded. She said, no country, she said, where'd it go? Here it is. She said that, looking for my specific quote here. She said, no lies by Tucker Carlson, essentially, will stamp out my love for this country or my resolve to make our union more perfect. So what did Tucker Carlson say about her? He said that she is living proof that the way we practice immigration has become dangerous to this country. She says that Omar left one of the world's poorest countries to come to America, the world's richest country, and all the bounty that implies, claiming that she has a lot to be grateful for. And then Tucker Carlson, honest to God, said this. Can you imagine a member of the media who still has a job today, looks into the camera and says to America, this black woman who came to the United States as a refugee and who loves this country and has been working to improve this country and worked her way all the way up to Congress. He says, he said, but she isn't grateful, not at all. After everything America has done for Omar and her family, she hates this country more than ever. That's the kind of language that led to the Rwandan genocide, where they were calling one of the two tribes, I don't recall if it was Hutu, the Tutsis or the Hutus, or Hutsis. Yeah, whatever it is. Which one was the minority group? But they only were about 15% of the population. But the majority group was literally on talk radio saying, these people hate this country, they're cockroaches, go out and kill them. And they did. I mean, this is about as close to asking somebody to assassinate a sitting member of Congress as I've ever heard. He goes on to say, so be grateful for Ilhan Omar, as annoying as she is. She's a living fire alarm, a warning to the rest of us that we better change our immigration system immediately or else. So, is the United States the first country to actually see democracy go backwards? Vladimir Putin recently said, President Putin of Russia recently said that liberal democracy is now obsolete. And, from the point of view of people like Tucker Carlson, I think this is their perspective. And not just in the United States. The liberal democracy has been under attack basically since the beginning of the Reagan administration. So the question, is America the first country, the first developed country, to actually move backwards? I mean, conservatives led the destruction of the U.S. labor market. Reagan and Clinton, and it wasn't just Clinton. I mean, it was just this entire era from the 80s until just recently kicked off an era of massive deregulation. Well, Trump is still doing it. Massive deregulation led directly to the crash of 2008. Reagan, Bush, and Trump's massive tax cuts have thrown America massively into debt and wildly exacerbated the divide between rich and poor. Go back to Reagan's tax cuts. Those three tax cuts and those three Republican presidents account for virtually all of the national debt. The rest of it can be accounted for by George W. Bush's illegal wars. Now, you know, we have moved toward a more economically equal society in some ways, but actually not since the 1980s. We're actually going backwards. And then we've got Trump's demagoguery over his wall and putting kids in cages, inflaming the white racists like Tucker Carlson, and threatening to undo us, you know, this last century of forward progress, Brown v. Board and everything else. So the question, was America the first country where liberal democracy began to backslide? How rapidly is this accelerating across the world? We're seeing right-wing parties now rising to power in those countries that have experienced neoliberal attacks, like Greece and Spain and others. Is this the end of liberal democracy, for that matter? And I'm not talking about liberal like I'm a liberal. I'm talking about liberal democracy as in the idea of and of course it was just an idea at the time, but the idea of the founders when this country was first put together, the improvements after the Civil War, the improvements after, you know, with the Great Society and Lyndon Johnson. How are we the first to go backwards, and how do we stop that slide?